There are moments in human memory older than writing, older than the rise and fall of empires, when the sky itself becomes a storyteller. And among all the celestial whispers that drift across the ages, none is more persistent, more unsettling, than the tale of the two suns. It appears like a scar across time, a wound shared by peoples who never met, separated by oceans and by ages, yet united by a single haunting vision that once, long before our calendars began, two suns burned above the earth, and one vanished, taking an entire age with it. The elders of the Hopi speak of this moment without hesitation, as though recounting the change of a season. The Norse carved it into sagas that survived fire and frost. The Vedic seers sang it into hymns older than the temples themselves. To each of them, the dual suns were not simply curiosities in the sky, they were warnings, revelations, mirrors held up to humanity's fragile heart. But what did they truly witness? What was it that burned so brightly above their ancestors, that the memory of it still glows in stories told thousands of years later? Some say it was a celestial event, an explosion of a distant star, a supernova so bright that for a moment it rivaled the sun itself. Others whispered that it was something else. Something deeper, a spiritual doubling, a cosmic symbol pointing not to the sky but to the human soul. And still others wonder whether these myths preserve a memory far more real than we dare admit. A natural catastrophe so bright and so sudden that it scorched itself into the collective mind of early humanity. The truth sits somewhere between these interpretations, suspended like a lantern between worlds. But whichever answer we choose, the question remains. Why did civilizations separated by continents all remember a second sun? Why did they give it names, colors, personalities? Blue, Kachina, red purifier, Suna the daughter of soul, Savitar, the hidden radiance of Surya. Why did they insist that this second light did not merely brighten the sky but changed the fate of the world? Tonight, we step into that question as one would step into a long-abandoned temple, the dust of forgotten eras rising beneath our feet. We follow the light first to the red mesas of the Hopi, where stone remembers what men have tried to forget. Then north to the ice-lit realm of the Vikings, where twin suns once glimmered like omens over frozen seas. And finally, east into the incense-thick air of Vedic India, where sages spoke of two kinds of illumination, one that warms the world and one that awakens the soul. But before we set out upon those ancient paths, we linger at the threshold, where myths converge like rivers meeting the sea. Because at the heart of this story lies an idea so old and so simple that the ancients expressed it with fire, that every world, every civilization, every human life is lit by two lights. One is the light we see radiant, dazzling, sovereign in the sky. The other is the light we carry inside us, quieter, more fragile, easily lost. When the outer light grows too bright, too harsh, too consuming, it blinds us. When the inner light grows dim, the world itself darkens. And somewhere between these two flames, the future of humankind is decided again and again. Perhaps this is why the myths speak of the second sun, not as a moment, but as a cycle. A sun that appears when humanity strays too far from balance. A sun that reminds, warns, purifies. A sun that returns when we forget who we are. Yet even this raises its own questions. Questions the ancients themselves wrestled with. Was the second sun a literal flare in the heavens? A celestial wanderer blazing with impossible light? Or was it a symbol, born not from astronomy but from intuition, a way for old souls to warn the young that every age burns twice, first in ignorance and then in consequence? Imagine for a moment being one of those early watchers of the sky. You stand on a dry mesa or at the edge of a frozen fjord. The world is quiet, untouched by machines. The stars are bright enough to cast shadows. And then one morning, the horizon blooms with two suns instead of one golden, one pale, both burning through the thin veil of dawn. Two modern eyes. It could be a parhelion, a trick of ice crystals bending light. But to you, ancient observer, it is a sign, a message, an intervention. Something has awakened in the heavens, and earth itself trembles in recognition. Is it any wonder then that these visions became prophecy? That entire cultures shaped their cosmology around the moment the heavens carried two flames instead of one? The sky was their scripture, the stars were their archives. And a sudden light in the heavens was not just an event, it was a revelation. Even now, with telescopes that can see the birth of galaxies and satellites that map the invisible contours of space, we remain captivated by the idea of twin suns. We write theories about binary stars, about rogue companions our sun might once have had, about distant explosions whose light took centuries to reach Earth. But beneath every scientific model lies a more ancient truth. Humanity has always looked up not only for knowledge, but for meaning. And perhaps this is why the story of the two suns refuses to die. Because it is more than a record of what the sky once showed. It is a story about Usura innocence, our arrogance, our hope for renewal. It is the memory of a moment when creation felt close enough to touch, and destruction close enough to fear. A reminder that the heavens do not merely shine, they speak. So as we step into the first of the old prophecies, let us walk carefully. Let us listen the way the ancestors once listened, quietly, patiently, without asking whether the message is literal or symbolic, scientific or spiritual. Let us simply follow the light as it leads us back to a world that has almost vanished, a world where the sky was alive, where every sunrise was a revelation, and where a second sun could change not only the heavens but the destiny of humanity. Beneath the vast silence of the Arizona mesas, the Hopi people have watched the same sunrise for 1,000 generations. Here, the land is a library written in stone, and the wind carries stories older than the nations that now surround them. To the Hopi, the sky is not a distant ceiling, but a breathing presence, one that remembers every cycle, every promise, every mistake humanity has ever made. And among the sky's many memories, none is whispered more carefully than the prophecy of the Blue Star and the Red Purifier, the two celestial beings that move like twin suns in the ancestral imagination. The Hopi speak of worlds, not centuries. In their cosmology, humanity has walked through for great ages, each ending when mankind forgets its place within the sacred balance. The first world fell to fire. The second was taken by ice. The third drowned beneath rising waters. And now we live in the fourth world, a world sustained by a fragile equilibrium that grows thinner each year. When this balance finally breaks, the elders say, the sky itself will reveal the signs, and the purification will begin. The first sign is the blue Kachina, the blue star that dances in the heavens. It is not merely a point of light, but a messenger, a revealer of truth. Its arrival marks the unraveling of illusions, political, spiritual, technological, and the beginning of an age when humanity can no longer hide behind its own inventions. The Hopi describe it as the moment the world begins to see clearly, when the false scaffolding of society begins to shake. For some, the blue Kachina was already witnessed nearly 1,000 years ago. In 1054, when a supernova erupted in Taurus with a brightness that outshone Venus, Chinese astronomers recorded it in meticulous detail. The ancestral Pueblones carved it into canyon walls. Even modern astronomers confirm that for weeks, that stellar explosion was visible during the day. It was, in every sense, a second sun. To the Hopi, this event may have been a cosmic rehearsal, a preview of what is to come, or a memory encoded in the collective spirit of their people. Others believe the blue Kachina remains ahead of us, still hidden in the dark corridors of space, a wandering star or comet that will blaze blue as it approaches our world. Whichever interpretation we choose, its symbolism remains the same. The blue Kachina strips away illusion. It is the truth brought into focus. The moment when humanity can no longer pretend it does not see what stands before it. But the prophecy does not end with the blue star, for following it comes the red Kachina, the purifier, the second sun whose fire does not merely illuminate but burns. This being spirit, star, Omen removes his mask and dances before all people. When he does, the Hopi say, the purification begins. Earth will tremble beneath his steps. The sky will darken with smoke and light with fire, and everything that has drifted too far from balance will be scorched clean. The red Kachina is not a punishing god. He is the inevitable consequence of forgetting. He is the flame that follows arrogance, the correction that follows blindness. In the Hopi worldview, the red purifier exists because humanity tends to stray. When the collective ego grows too bright, when spiritual memory dims, when the inner sun flickers weakly, the red Kachina restores the equilibrium through fire. Modern Hopi messengers, breaking centuries of silence, have revealed signs they believe were foreseen long before our modern age. They speak of a web of iron circling the earth, a net through which the voices of men travel, but where truth becomes tangled and lost. We know this web by another name, the global network of wires, satellites, and invisible signals that now encircle our planet, carrying every word we speak, every image we create. Never has humanity been more connected, yet never has truth felt more fragile. Another sign describes silver snakes crossing the sky, leaving trails where no bird flies. Jets, rockets, contrails streaking high above the clouds, phenomena the Hopi ancestors could not have imagined, yet eerily resembled their ancient verses. These sightings are not interpreted as marvels of progress, but as warnings that the sky is filling with the noise of a species that has forgotten how to listen. The more one listens to the Hopi prophecy, the more one senses that the two suns are not simply astronomical curiosities but reflections of a deeper duality. For the Hopi, every celestial sign is a mirror. The blue Kachina symbolizes awakening, clarity, spiritual renewal. The red Kachina symbolizes consequence, purification, the clearing of decay. One reveals, one restores, but both act to realign humanity with truths it has neglected. And this is where the narrative shifts inward, where myth becomes introspection. For the Hopi insists that the two suns burn not only in the sky but within us. One is the sun of spirit, humility, community, the inherent sacredness of all life. The other is the sun of ego, ambition, excess, the desire to dominate rather than coexist. When the inner sun of spirit shines brightly, the world remains in balance. But when ego grows too strong, it casts a glare that blinds us, transforming brilliance into destruction. In this interpretation, the prophecy is not about celestial catastrophe but about moral imbalance. Purification begins not with fire from the heavens, but with the recognition that we have allowed the wrong sun to guide us. The elders say that only those who walk in balance will endure the transition into the fifth world, the world of renewal. Survival will not be decided by wealth, power, or technological achievement. It will belong to those who remember the old teachings, those who live lightly on the land, honor their communities, and move with humility rather than hunger. For the Hopi, the new world is not a prize granted by the gods, but a state of harmony regained by people who choose remembrance over forgetting. Even now, as the world changes with a speed the old prophets could not have foreseen, the Hopi message feels less like myth and more like diagnosis. Skies crowded with artificial lights, fires claiming forests, waters rising, nations fracturing under the weight of their own illusions. The Hopi do not say these things to induce fear, but to remind us that purification is not the end. It is a beginning, the clearing of overgrowth to reveal what was always meant to be seen. Perhaps then, the meaning of the two suns lies not in astronomical speculation but in human responsibility. The blue Kachina asks us to see. The red Kachina asks us to change. And together they form a cycle that has repeated through all of human history, echoing through myth after myth, urging us to remember the light that is both above us and within us. For long before a second sun returns to the sky, the Hopi say, it rises in the heart, quiet, steady, waiting for us to notice. Far to the north, where winter lingers like an ancient spirit and the air carries the metallic scent of snow, another vision of two suns was carved into memory. Here, under skies thick with frost and auroras that writhe like serpents of living light, the Norse gazed upward and believed they saw the heavens rehearsing their own destruction. For them, the twin suns were not a promise of awakening or a gentle reminder of balance. They were the blazing heralds of Ragnarok, the final firestorm that would break the world and birth it anew. In the sagas whispered around firelit halls, the sun was not merely a celestial body but a goddess named Sol, brilliant and relentless, who drove her radiant chariot across the sky each day. Behind her ran a wolf skull, the devourer, its breath cold enough to freeze oceans, its paws shaking the sky itself. Sol's fate was sealed since the first dawn. One day the wolf would catch her, one day her light would be swallowed, one day the world would lose its first sun. But Sol was not alone. Behind her, running in the wake of her burning path, was her daughter Suna, a second radiant presence destined to rise when her mother fell. This younger sun did not yet blaze in the sky. It waited, like an heir hidden behind a curtain of time. And so, in the lore of the Norse, there were always two suns, one living, one waiting, one destined to die, one destined to ascend. This duality lay at the heart of their prophecy. When the end drew near, the sagas said, the two suns would blaze together. Sol's light would falter as soon as grew. The sky would tear open with fire, mountains would break like clay, oceans would climb over the land. Stars, those hard, cold points of certainty, would vanish from the heavens as though they had been snuffed out by an unseen hand. This was the twilight before Ragnarok, the moment when the world realized it was standing at the edge of its own story. And yet, for all its terror, the Norse did not picture this as chaos without purpose. Their world was built on cycles: creation, order, decay, renewal. Every age ends. Every flame burns out. Every god must one day fall. Even Odin, the father of wisdom, even Thor with his thunderous strength, could escape the last great night. But from the ashes of this collapse would rise the new world, green and washed clean by the fires that had consumed the old one. And upon that renewed earth Suna, the second sun, would shine brighter, purer, freed from the shadow of her mother's doom. The Norse saw the dual suns not as a matter of astronomy, but as a truth of existence. Destruction is not the enemy of creation, but its necessary companion. Every flame casts light and shadow. Every life ends so another can begin. When they imagined two suns burning overhead before the final battle, they were not only describing a celestial omen, they were describing the heart of fate itself. Yet even this myth contains echoes of a natural phenomenon that still haunts the skies of the Arctic. On certain winter days, when the air is sharp with ice crystals too small to see, the sun grows halos, rings of pale fire, and, at their edges, appear bright flares of light. Perhelia mock suns. Sun dogs. To the Norse, these were not optical illusions but warnings. Glimpses of the cosmic machinery grinding toward its final turning. Imagine a Viking standing on a snow-laden cliff, watching two bright orbs shimmering beside the true sun, as if the sky itself had multiplied its light. How could it not feel like prophecy? But the power of this vision lies not in atmospheric science, but in emotion. Two suns in the Norse imagination were not gentle symbols. They were omens of inevitability. They told a story of a world too proud, too hardened, too deaf to the whispers of fate, forced to face the fire it had long ignored. The dual suns were the visible proof that every age burns twice, once in its arrogance, once in its reckoning. And this reckoning, they believed, was not merely physical but moral. When the sagas speak of the sun turning black, they are describing more than an eclipse. They are describing a moment of spiritual blindness, when a society loses its way and no longer recognizes the path that once kept it whole. The earth sinking into the sea is not only a flood but the collapse of values. the drowning of meaning beneath the weight of its own contradictions. Stars vanishing from the sky reflect a humanity that has lost its guides, its elders, its wisdom, its ability to see beyond the present moment. In this way, the two suns become more than astronomical events or supernatural visions. They become symbols of the human soul under siege. One sun represents all that is luminous within courage, honor, the willingness to meet fate with open eyes. The other represents the fire that destroys what has become corrupt, greed, division, the coldness that creeps into a world that forgets the sacredness of its own story. The Norse did not fear this duality. In fact, they embraced it. For them, the measure of a person was not how long they lived, but how they faced the inevitable. To stand in the light of two suns before Ragnarok was to stand at the crossroads between destruction and renewal. One could cower, or one could step forward, knowing that even in death there was transformation. This fierce acceptance, this willingness to walk into flame with dignity, was the heart of their worldview. Perhaps that is why their myth of two suns feels so different from the Hopis. Where the Hopi see purification and balance, the Norse see fire and fate. Where the Hopi emphasize survival through humility, the Norse emphasize meaning through courage. Yet both traditions, in their own language, describe the same truth. When humanity strays too far from its center, the sky responds not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. The twin suns of the Norse remind us that endings are not aberrations, but chapters. That collapse can be the doorway through which a new light enters. That even in the darkest moment, a sun waits unseen, ready to rise once more. And so their prophecy endures, not as a prediction of doom, but as a testament to the resilience of light. For while one sun burns the world, the other keeps the flame alive inside the soul, carrying it forward into whatever dawn comes after the firestorm. Far to the east, where the air once trembled with the low hum of sacred chants and the scent of sandalwood clung to temple stones, the ancient seers of India looked at the sky and saw not destruction, not prophecy of fire or wolves, but a deeper and quieter duality woven into the very fabric of existence. For them, the story of the two suns was not a warning of an ending, it was a map of consciousness, a lesson whispered through light itself. In the Rig Veda, among the oldest surviving hymns humanity has ever sung, the sun was not simply a ball of fire, nor just a god with a radiant face. It was a truth, a fundamental principle. Surya, the visible sun, was the life-giver, the charioteer of daylight, the one who illuminated the external world and allowed all things to grow. But behind Surya was another presence, softer, hidden Savitar, the silent sun, the inner radiance that did not shine in the sky, but in the heart. Where other cultures imagined two physical suns blazing overhead, the Vedic tradition placed one sun in the heavens and the other within the human soul. Together, Surya and Savitar formed the dual light of Dharma, the cosmic order that governs all things, the outer law that shapes reality, and the inner truth that guides consciousness. When these two lights were in harmony, the world flourished. When they drifted apart, confusion descended like a fog. This idea that truth has both an outer and an inner face was so fundamental that it became enshrined in their most sacred prayer, the Gayatri Mantra. It calls upon that divine radiance which illuminates all realms and asks that it awaken the mind. It is both an invocation to the sun above and a plea for the awakening of the sun within. For the Vedic sages, enlightenment was not the acquisition of new knowledge, but the alignment of these two lights, the moment when the visible and the invisible found their rhythm. But they also warned that this rhythm would not last. Humanity, they said, would inevitably enter an age when Surya's outer light would dominate Savitar's inner one. This age of the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, would be defined not by physical darkness but by spiritual blindness, a time when humans would mistake the reflection for the source, the shadow for the truth, the flicker for the flame. And so the Vedas describe an epoch chillingly familiar to us, a world where technology imitates enlightenment, where glowing screens replace sacred fire, where data masquerades as wisdom, where noise drowns out silence, and distraction parades as insight. In this age, the false sun rises not in the sky, but in human consciousness. It shines brightly enough to dazzle, but not deeply enough to nourish. Its warmth is seductive, its glow artificial. To the ancient seers, the false sun was not a prophecy of celestial danger, but a psychological one. It warned of a world in which humanity becomes so enamored with its own creations that it forgets the source of creation itself. A world in which intellect overshadows intuition, and knowledge without compassion becomes a cold and dangerous flame. In this state, Surya's outer brightness overwhelms Savitar's inner light, and the balance collapses. This collapse, they believed, would inevitably manifest in the world of nature, for the cosmos, they taught, is not separate from human consciousness, it is a mirror of it. When the inner sun dims, the world reacts. Droughts, storms, floods, rising oceans, fractured nations, these were seen not as divine punishment, but as reflections of inner imbalance. Just as a fever signals the body's attempt to heal itself, turmoil in nature signals humanity's spiritual dissonance. The sky changes because we have changed. The earth trembles because our inner foundations have cracked. And so, in the Vedic tradition, the two suns become a kind of cosmic diagnosis. Surya reveals the outer world, Savitar reveals the inner one. When both shine together, humanity walks in truth. When one overpowers the other, illusion takes hold. The dual suns are not antagonists, but partners, guiding humanity through cycles of clarity and confusion. The ancient texts speak of an eventual rebalancing, a return of harmony between these two lights. This rebalancing is not brought by apocalypse, nor by divine intervention, but by awakening, by the rediscovery of the inner sun. It comes when humans begin to see that the outer radiance, no matter how bright, can never replace the light within. It comes when technology regains its place as a tool rather than a master, when silence is no longer feared, when truth is sought not in the glow of screens but in the quiet spaces of the mind. Even modern astronomy, which often speaks in equations rather than metaphors, has stumbled upon ideas that echo Vedic intuition. The suggestion that our sun may once have had a twin, a dark companion named Nemesis, long lost in the vastness of space, feels uncannily aligned with the old notion that every source of light has a hidden counterpart. Binary stars are common throughout the galaxy. The idea of a dual solar system is not pure myth, but scientific possibility. And while Nemesis remains hypothetical, the symbolism persists. Light is rarely singular, but for the Vedic sages, the most important twin was not astronomical, it was human. They taught that each of us carries two lights, the light that sees the world, and the light that understands it, the light that acts, and the light that knows why. When these two lights are separated, the world darkens, even if the sun shines as brightly as ever. Perhaps this is why their vision of the two suns feels less like prophecy and more like a mappa, way of understanding why civilizations rise and fall, why cultures flourish and decay. When the inner sun is forgotten, people chase shadows, confuse appearance with reality, elevate imitation over authenticity. The false sun becomes the tyrant of perception, leading entire societies into confusion not because it deceives, but because it distracts. But the Vedas insist that this state is temporary. Darkness, they say, does not defeat light, it merely obscures it. The inner sun never dies, it only hides. And when enough people remember it, the two suns join once more, and a new yuga begins, not with fire or destruction, but with clarity. In this way, the Vedic vision completes the circle, begun by the Hopi in the North. The Hopi see purification, the Norse see renewal through fire, and the Vedic seers speak of rebalancing. 3 cultures, 3 continents, 1 message, that the world will realign itself when humanity does. For in the end, the two suns are not celestial bodies, nor supernatural omens, but reflections of our own divided nature, one bright, one hidden, both waiting to be united. Across the long arc of human history, myth and science have often stood like two figures on opposite ends of a vast chasm, one speaking in metaphor, the other in measurement. And yet, when the subject turns to the mystery of the second sun, these two voices begin to echo each other in ways too striking to dismiss. It is as if the ancients, gazing upward with naked eyes and reverent hearts, captured truths that modern astronomers now chase with telescopes and equations. Perhaps both are trying to describe the same thing, one in poetry, the other in physics. For decades, scientists have speculated that our sun may once have had a twin, a faint red dwarf orbiting so far into the dark that it escaped detection for millennia. They call this hypothetical companion Nemesis, named after the Greek spirit of retribution. For some believed it might periodically disturb the Oort cloud and send comets toward Earth in long, devastating cycles. If such a star ever existed, it would have been almost invisible, but in some ancient epoch, perhaps closer, perhaps brighter, its disappearance, whether by drift or by gravitational unraveling, could have been a sight unforgettable to early humanity. Others propose that the second sun may have been nothing more than a supernova star dying in a blaze so immense that it outshone the day for weeks. The supernova of 1054, which created the Crab Nebula, is the clearest example in recorded history. Chinese astronomers noted it carefully. Middle Eastern scholars wrote of its eerie brightness, and in the stone canyons of the American Southwest, a petroglyph depicts a radiant star beside a crescent moon. Some believe it is a memory etched by ancestral Puebloans who witnessed the event themselves. Imagine standing in the desert at dawn, watching a new sun rise beside the old one, burning with a clarity that felt impossible. To the scientific mind, this is the death throe of a distant giant, but to the human soul unshielded by modern knowledge it would have been a message, a sign, a rupture in the sky so profound that its memory would slip into legend, becoming not just a record, but a revelation. Still others look not to stars, but to our own atmosphere. Perhelia sundogs can produce 2, sometimes 3 brilliant halos that mimic the sun. These fiery companions hover on either side of the real sun, turning winter skies into surreal. Even today, those who see them often pause in awe, as though witnessing something not meant for human eyes. What would ancient eyes have thought? What stories would they have woven with no meteorology to explain it? Only intuition and the aching sense that the heavens were speaking. And yet, the deeper we travel into these scientific possibilities, the closer we come to a realization that transcends astrophysics, that the ancients may not have been describing a single event at all. Instead, they may have been recording a pattern, a repeating experience of duality, a recognition that the universe itself follows cycles of illumination and shadow, birth and dissolution. In this view, the two suns become less about the sky and more about the nature of existence. Every age burns twice, once in its rising glory, once in its inevitable correction. Modern cosmology speaks of binary stars, of orbital decay, of supernova remnants glowing faintly in the void. Myth speaks of twin deities, of purifying flames, of lights that test and transform the human heart. But beneath these languages lies the same intuition, that light is not singular, that creation is not a single note but a harmony of forces, that behind every brightness lies another, sometimes nurturing, sometimes destructive, always waiting. This is why myth can never be dismissed as mere invention. Myths are not falsehoods, they are ancestral astronomy, the sky interpreted through the lens of meaning. They preserve what scientific instruments cannot record, the emotional impact of celestial events, the moral interpretations woven by communities who understood themselves as part of a larger, breathing cosmos. When a star exploded, they did not write an equation, they asked why it appeared, what it meant, what it asked of them, and their answers, layered into Hopi prophecy, Norse saga, and Vedic hymn, point toward a truth modern science cannot measure, that the greater danger is not a star in the sky but a star going dark within us. The Hopi warned that when humanity lives out of balance, purification comes. The Norse taught that when arrogance grows unchecked, the world burns to make way for new life. The Vedas spoke of an age when false light blinds the mind and the inner sun retreats into silence. These warnings are not astronomical, they are spiritual. They describe not physics but forgetting. So what, then, is the second sun? Is it a wandering star that slipped from our system long ago? A supernova that tore open the sky with impossible brilliance? A trick of light refracted through ice? Or is it a symbol, an ancient way of telling us that every civilization carries two fires within it, one that creates and one that consumes? Perhaps the ancients were not describing an event but a choice. Every society, like every person, stands beneath two suns, one outer, dazzling with achievement, technology, conquest, and one inner, quiet with humility, wisdom, compassion. The outer sun builds cities. The inner sun sustains them. The outer sun drives progress. The inner sun gives direction. When the two burn in harmony, the world thrives. But when the inner sun dims, the outer burns too brightly, scorching what it once illuminated. Maybe this is why the two-sun prophecy appears across continents. It was never merely about fire in the heavens, it was about frost in the soul, the chilling of conscience, the dimming of the human spirit beneath the glare of its own brilliance. And so we come to the final, gentle truth of these myths. The second sun was never lost. It never vanished into darkness or drifted beyond the reach of telescopes. It is waiting in the quiet places inside us that modern life has taught us to ignore. It waits in the moments when we choose honesty over comfort, compassion over indifference, reverence over consumption, memory over distraction. When enough hearts remember this inner sun, the two lights become one again, not in the sky, but in the world we create together. And in that reunion lies the dawn, not of destruction, but of renewal. In this soft alignment, the Hopi purification, the Norse firestorm, and the Vedic awakening all converge into a single understanding, that the true destiny of humanity is not written in the stars above us, but in the light we choose to carry within. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the age the ancients saw coming. Not the end of the world, but the end of our forgetting. A slow, steady return to balance. A rediscovery of the sun that has always burned behind our ribs. And when that day arrives, the sky will not need to blaze with a second sun, because humanity, at last, will no longer walk in shadow.